Emily's family buried her 3 months ago. Last night, her mother received a voicemail, and the voice on the other end was Emily's. Before we begin, let our little Knight family know you're here. Drop your first name, where you're listening from, and your local time in the comments. I always love seeing familiar names checking in before another story begins. I'm Ryan, the real Ryan, and tonight I'll walk beside you through a case that started with one impossible phone call and ended somewhere nobody was prepared to look. Now, get comfortable, and let's begin. The voicemail arrived at exactly 11:42 on a quiet Thursday night. Emily Carter's mother almost ignored the notification because unknown numbers had become common after the funeral. Insurance companies, charities, distant relatives, people offering sympathy months too late. She nearly deleted it without listening. Something made her stop. She pressed play. There was no static, no strange background noise, just Emily's voice, soft and calm, exactly the way she always sounded when she called home after work. "Hi, Mom. I know this is going to sound strange, but please don't let them close the boxes in the attic." The message ended, only 11 seconds. Emily had been buried for 93 days. Her mother listened again, then again. By sunrise, she had memorized every pause, every breath, every tiny change in Emily's voice. Grief had taught her many painful lessons, yet one remained certain. Mothers recognized their children. No machine, no stranger, no clever imitation could fool her ears. Polis arrived before noon. 2 officers spent less than 15 minutes inside the house before reaching the same conclusion they already believed. Someone was playing a cruel joke. The accident had been investigated. The death certificate had been signed. The funeral had happened. Case closed. When Emily's mother asked whether they planned to trace the number, one officer promised they would look into it. The other quietly gathered his notebook and walked toward the front door. Neither expected answers. Both expected silence. 3 days later, the family contacted me. I had spent almost 12 years investigating stories that sounded impossible until ordinary details proved otherwise. Most ended with simple explanations: insurance fraud, family disputes, old recordings shared at the wrong time. Still, something about this voicemail refused to fit. Emily's father met me outside their small home before I even reached the porch. He looked exhausted, carrying the kind of sadness that never truly leaves. Instead of shaking my hand, he handed me an old photograph. Emily stood beside a blue pickup truck, smiling beneath bright autumn trees. "That's the last picture I ever took," he said quietly. Inside the living room, Emily's mother played the voicemail without saying a word. I closed my eyes, not because I believed ghosts existed, because voices tell stories that faces sometimes hide. When the recording finished, nobody spoke for nearly a full minute. Finally, I asked the only question that mattered. "Has anyone checked when this message was actually recorded?" Emily's parents looked at each other. Both slowly shook their heads. That afternoon, I drove straight to an independent digital audio laboratory, carrying nothing except a copied voicemail, a notebook, and the uncomfortable feeling that someone wanted this family to hear Emily's voice for a reason. I still believed there would be a logical explanation. I just didn't know yet that logic was about to lead somewhere far darker than anyone imagined. I expected the audio specialist to smile politely, point toward a software glitch, and send me home with an ordinary answer. Cases like this usually ended that way. Strange stories often became simple. Once enough facts replaced fear, this one didn't. The technician copied the voicemail onto a secure computer and examined every layer of the recording without saying much. Waveforms filled the screen. Tiny peaks and valleys stretched across the monitor while he adjusted filters, removed background interference, and searched for signs of editing. Nearly 20 minutes passed before he finally leaned back. "You're not going to like this," he said. "I wasn't looking for surprises. I was looking for the truth. The file hasn't been altered." I frowned. "You mean someone recorded it professionally?" He slowly shook his head. "No, I mean the message itself is original. No cuts, no stitched pieces, no cloned sections. Whoever spoke recorded this in one take." That answer created a bigger problem than the voicemail itself. Emily had officially died 93 days earlier. I asked him one more question. "When was it recorded?" He turned the monitor toward me. The phone network attached metadata before it reached the family. He paused. "It entered the system last Thursday. Not months ago. Not before the funeral. Last Thursday. For the first time since taking the case, I felt something cold settle across my shoulders. Someone had recorded Emily's voice recently. Or someone wanted us to believe they had. If you're enjoying these slow-burning mysteries, subscribe now so you won't miss the next investigation. Every week we uncover another story that begins with something impossible and ends somewhere far more unsettling. Leaving the laboratory, I drove directly toward the county records office. If the voicemail was genuine, every official document surrounding Emily's death deserved another look. The accident report described a single-vehicle crash along Route 18 just after midnight. Heavy rain, poor visibility, no witnesses. The car struck a concrete barrier before catching fire. Silb's almost too simple. Then I noticed something almost everyone else had ignored. The report listed the emergency call at 12:11 a.m. The first patrol car arrived at 12:24. The ambulance arrived 4 minutes later. Yet the medical examiner estimated Emily died shortly before 1 o'clock. That left nearly 40 unexplained minutes. 40 minutes when nobody could clearly account for what happened beside that empty highway. I requested photographs from the scene. Most showed exactly what I expected: twisted metal, broken glass, rain covering everything, until the final image. Near the burned driver's door sat a small black cell phone, perfectly intact, not melted, not cracked, not even wet. According to the evidence log, investigators never recovered it. There was only one handwritten note beneath the photograph: "Adamant missing before collection." I stared at those 4 words much longer than I should have, because suddenly the voicemail wasn't the only thing that had disappeared. Someone had quietly removed the one object capable of proving where Emily had really been, and who might have spoken to her after the world believed she was already gone. The missing phone changed everything. Accident scenes were controlled environments. Every piece of evidence was photographed, labeled, collected, and stored. Phones almost never vanished on their own. If Emily's device disappeared before investigators secured it, somebody reached the wreck first. I needed to know who. The county dispatch office released the emergency call after I filed a public records request. The recording lasted less than 2 minutes. A frightened man reported flames beside Route 18. He refused to give his name. Then the line, disconnected Butch, called back twice. Nobody answered. That alone wasn't unusual. People panicked. People ran. People forgot details. What bothered me was the timestamp. The anonymous caller contacted emergency services nearly 10 minutes before the first officer arrived, yet traffic cameras showed no vehicles leaving the area during that entire stretch of highway. According to the cameras, nobody was there. I visited the crash site the following morning. Rain had washed away almost every trace of what happened months earlier. But the road still felt strangely empty. A weathered guardrail stood beside a shallow ditch, while tall pine trees blocked most of the morning sunlight. Drivers passed without slowing. Nobody noticed the small memorial tied to a wooden post. Fresh flowers rested beneath Emily's photograph. Someone had visited recently. An older woman arranging the flowers looked up as I approached. "You knew her?" I asked. She smiled sadly. "I was her third-grade teacher. We spoke for several minutes. Emily had always called every few months just to check in. She remembered birthdays, sent Christmas cards, helped neighbors without being asked. Then the teacher quietly mentioned something unexpected. The week before she died, Emily kept saying someone was following her. I looked up immediately. Did she tell the police?" "I don't think so." "What exactly did she say?" The woman stared toward the road before answering. She said every time she looked into her mirror, the same gray pickup stayed behind her. That wasn't anywhere in the accident report. Back at my car, I searched traffic citations from nearby counties. "Gray pickup," wrote 18, 3 weeks before Emily's death. One result appeared. A speeding ticket issued less than 15 miles from the crash. The vehicle owner wasn't local. The registration belonged to a property management company almost 300 miles away. Odd. Companies rarely drove rural highways after midnight. Even stranger, that same company owned several abandoned rental houses across 3 counties. Most had sat empty for years. One address caught my attention because it appeared in another file connected to a missing persons investigation from 8 years earlier. Different woman, different town, same property owner. As the pattern slowly came together, my phone vibrated. The audio specialist had sent one final message. I missed something earlier. Attached was an enhanced version of Emily's voicemail. I raised the volume. Her voice remained calm, clear, almost comforting. Then, beneath her final words, another sound emerged, very faint, almost impossible to hear. A train horn long low, followed by a man's voice whispering only 3 words. "She's still here." I played the recording again, then again. The words never changed. Neither did the train horn hiding beneath Emily's voice. The sound was distant but clear enough to recognize. Somewhere close to wherever that voicemail had been recorded, a freight train had crossed nearby. It wasn't much, yet it was the first real clue, pointing toward an actual place instead of another impossible question. I opened a railway map before leaving the parking lot. Route 18 didn't have active train tracks within 20 miles. That meant one thing. Emily hadn't recorded the message near the crash site. Someone had taken her somewhere else. By late afternoon, I found only 4 towns where freight lines still operated close to abandoned residential properties owned by the same management company. One address stood apart from the others. A forgotten farmhouse outside Millhaven Fee for almost 11 years. Officially, I arrived just before sunset. The driveway had almost disappeared beneath tall grass, while broken windows reflected the fading light like dark mirrors. The mailbox leaned sideways, covered in rust, yet fresh tire marks crossed the muddy entrance someone had visited recently. The front door wasn't locked, it stood slightly open. Inside, the air smelled of dust-damp wood and something strangely familiar, lavender. Emily's mother had mentioned. Her daughter always carried lavender hand cream because she hated the smell of hospitals. The scent shouldn't have been there, not after 11 abandoned years. Every room looked empty until I reached the kitchen. A single coffee mug rested beside the sink. Still clean, still dry, no dust. I crouched beside it. Whoever had been inside hadn't left long ago. The house wasn't abandoned. It was being used, A narrow hallway led toward the back of the building. Halfway down, I noticed tiny scratches running across the wooden floor, almost like heavy furniture had been dragged over the same path dozens of times. The marks ended beside an old storage closet. Nothing unusual at first glance, just another faded door. Then I noticed the hinges. They had been replaced recently, brand new metal against weathered wood. I pulled the handle. The closet appeared ordinary. Shelves, paint cans, broken tools. But the floor sounded hollow beneath my boots. I pushed everything aside and lifted a loose plywood panel. Hide underneath was a short staircase disappearing into darkness. Someone had built it carefully enough that casual visitors would never notice. My flashlight cut through the shadows one slow step at a time. The basement was larger than the house above. Concrete walls surrounded shelves filled with neatly labeled storage boxes. Each carried a woman's first name, dozens of them: Emily, Rachel, Nicole, Sarah, Hannah. Every box looked organized with unsettling care. Photographs, driver's licenses, old phones, handwritten journals, prescription bottles, entire lives packed away like forgotten memories. Then my light stopped on something resting alone across the room, a small black cell phone, perfectly intact, the same model missing from the accident scene. Its screen suddenly lit up by itself. An incoming call. The caller ID displayed only one word. Mom. The screen glowed inside the dark basement, lighting the room for only a second before fading again. I didn't touch it. My heartbeat had already started racing, yet instinct told me to wait. The phone rang again. Same caller, Mom. If this really belonged to Emily, then her mother should have been standing nearly 80 miles away inside her own living room. She couldn't possibly be calling a phone investigators believed had vanished forever. Unless she had never stopped trying. I answered silence, not the ordinary kind. This silence carried tiny sounds hidden beneath it. A slow drip somewhere far away, faint humming, almost like old electrical wiring, then breathing, someone else's breathing, very slow, very steady. I spoke first. Nothing. Another few seconds passed before the line disconnected. The basement became painfully quiet again. I immediately called Emily's mother. She answered before the first ring finished. "I was just trying your number," she said. A chill ran through me. "You weren't calling Emily's phone?" "No. I haven't even looked at her number in months." I stared back at the cell phone lying across the shelf. Then who had called it? Before I could think further, the device vibrated. A new notification appeared. No contact name, no phone number, just a single photograph. I opened it. The image showed the very basement where I was standing. Same shelves, same storage boxes, same staircase, only one difference. The picture had been taken from the opposite corner. Someone had photographed me less than a minute earlier. I swung my flashlight across the room. Concrete walls, metal shelves, dust floating through the beam. Nobody. Still. That picture existed. I climbed the stairs 2 at a time and searched every room again. Kitchen, living room, bedrooms, bathroom. Nothing. The farmhouse stood completely empty. Outside, evening had settled over the fields. Wind moved through tall grass while distant train tracks echoed with another long horn. Exactly the same sound hidden beneath Emily's voicemail. My phone buzzed. The audio specialist. "I kept working on the recording," he said without greeting me. "What did you find?" I isolated the background. I waited. Ryan. His voice sounded uneasy. "There are more voices. How many?" I counted 12. My stomach tightened. 12? They're all whispering. I walked back toward my car, never taking my eyes off the farmhouse. What are they saying? They aren't saying the same thing. A pause followed, then he quietly added, But every voice repeats one name. Emily. No, I stopped walking. Then whose name? Paper shuffled on his desk before he answered. They keep saying. Another pause. Daniel. That name meant nothing to me, not yet, until I remembered the property records. Every abandoned house connected to the management company had one signature on its inspection reports. No first name, no employee number, just one handwritten word, Daniel. For the first time since this investigation began, I wasn't chasing an impossible voicemail anymore. I was chasing a real person, and somehow he already knew exactly where I was. The drive back felt longer than usual. Every passing truck made me check the rearview mirror, expecting to see the same gray pickup Emily's teacher had described months earlier. Nothing stayed behind me for long, yet the uneasy feeling refused to disappear. Before returning home, I stopped at the county archives. If Daniel had signed inspection reports, there had to be employment records somewhere. The clerk disappeared into a back room for nearly 15 minutes before returning with a thin cardboard file. She apologized for the condition. Most of the company's older paperwork had been moved into storage years ago. I opened the folder, inspection forms, maintenance requests brought tardy taxes. Routine documents filled with ordinary details. Every page carried the same signature, Daniel, never a last name, never an employee number, never an address. Just one word written in neat black ink. That wasn't normal. Companies didn't pay people who officially didn't exist. I asked the clerk if she had ever met him. She frowned. I've processed these files for almost 12 years. She pointed toward the signature. I've seen that name hundreds of times. Another pause. I don't think I've ever seen his face. Those words stayed with me all afternoon. Back inside my office, I spread every document across the desk. Maps, photographs, inspection reports, the accident file, the basement pictures. I started connecting locations with colored pins. The pattern appeared almost immediately. Every abandoned property formed a rough circle around one place, Millhaven Rail Yard, an old freight terminal closed almost 20 years earlier. The train horn, the voicemail, the farmhouse, everything pointed toward the same forgotten stretch of railway. I searched local newspapers dating back 3 decades. Most articles mentioned declining business, empty warehouses, and factory closures. One headline caught my attention. Local care home shuts down after financial investigation. The building sat less than 2 miles from the rail yard. I kept reading. Several residents had been transferred before the closure. Records for 6 others couldn't be located. Missing paperwork. Missing identities. The story sounded strangely familiar. Then I noticed a photograph printed beside the article. The care home's maintenance supervisor stood near the entrance with several staff members. His face was partly hidden beneath a baseball cap. The image wasn't clear enough for identification. But one detail stood out, pinned across his work shirt, a stitched name tag, Daniel. Not long afterward, my phone rang. It was Emily's father. His voice sounded different, nervous. Someone chair scraped across the floor as I stood. Police? No, who was it? I don't know. What happened? He never knocked. A long silence followed. He just stood across the street watching. Did you recognize him? No, another pause. But what? He drove away in an old gray pickup. Every muscle in my body tightened. The truck wasn't following Emily anymore. Now, it was following everyone searching for the truth. I told Emily's father to lock every door, keep the porch lights on, and call me immediately if the driver returned. He promised he would, although neither of us believed a locked door could stop someone who had stayed invisible for so many years. Before hanging up, he quietly asked one question. "Do you think Emily was trying to warn Workas?" I looked at the evidence scattered across my desk: the voicemail, the missing phone, the hidden basement, the storage boxes. "Daniel, I think," I answered carefully. She wanted someone to start asking the right questions. That night, I drove toward Millhaven Rail Yard. The place had once handled freight moving across 3 states. Now it sat abandoned behind broken fencings and rusted gates. Empty warehouses stretched into the darkness while weeds pushed through cracked concrete. Every few minutes, another freight train rolled past on active tracks farther east, its horn echoing across the valley. Exactly the same sound hidden beneath Emily's message. I parked without turning off the engine. The silence felt wrong, not peaceful, watchful. Using a flashlight, I followed an old service road running beside the tracks. Fresh tire marks cut through the dirt. Despite heavy rain only 2 days earlier, someone had been there recently. The trail ended behind Warehouse 7. Most windows had been boarded shut, but one side entrance stood slightly open. Inside, the building smelled of oil, damp wood, and cold metal. Rows of abandoned shelving disappeared into darkness. Nothing moved, nothing spoke, yet the floor told another story. Fresh footprints crossed the dust, several different sizes, some heavy, others much smaller. I followed them deeper inside until my light landed on a folding table. Neatly arranged across its surface were dozens of photographs. Every picture showed a different woman. Some smiled at birthday parties, others stood beside family members, a few looked like driver's license photos. Across the corner of each image, someone had written a date, not birthdays, not deaths. Collection dates. My stomach tightened. Emily's photograph rested near the center. Her date appeared only 4 months before the accident. Beside it lay another folder. Inside were handwritten profiles, favorite coffee, work schedule, family members, medical history, places visited every weekend. It wasn't random. Someone had studied these women for months before taking their identities. Then I noticed one final page clipped beneath Emily's file. Across the top, written in careful black ink, were 3 words. Status, still active. I read them twice. Emily couldn't be active. She was dead, unless the file wasn't describing her life, unless it described the operation built around her identity. A sudden metallic clang echoed somewhere above me. I froze. Another sound followed. Slow footsteps. Not running, walking. Someone crossed the upper catwalk with complete confidence, as though they already knew exactly where I stood. I raised my flashlight. A figure paused behind the railing, too far away to recognize. Then, before disappearing into the darkness, the stranger spoke only one sentence. "You weren't supposed to find this place." And the voice sounded almost identical to the whisper hidden beneath Emily's voicemail. I ran toward the metal staircase leading to the upper catwalk. By the time I reached the top, the footsteps had stopped. The walkway stretched across the warehouse like a narrow bridge, surrounded by rusted machinery and broken windows that let pale moonlight spill across the floor below. Nobody stood there. No doors had opened. No windows were broken. It was as if the person had simply disappeared. Then I noticed something resting against the railing, a small digital voice recorder, still powered on. I picked it up. One recording, no title. No date. I pressed play. For several seconds, all I heard was the steady rumble of a passing freight train. Then a man's calm voice filled the speaker. "If you're listening to this, you've already found more than anyone else ever did." I stayed perfectly still. "You probably think Daniel is one man." A short laugh followed. "That's always the first mistake." The recording crackled before continuing. Daniel isn't a person. My grip tightened around the recorder. It's a name we inherited. Another pause. When one disappears, another becomes Daniel. The message ended with a sharp click. I replayed it twice, hoping I had misunderstood. Daniel wasn't hiding. Daniel was a role. Someone took the name. Someone replaced the last person. Again, Agan. Back at my office, I compared every signature from the property files. At first glance, they looked identical. The more closely I examined them, the more subtle differences appeared. One version slanted slightly left. Another pressed harder into the paper. A third formed the letter D differently. Someone had copied the signature. Not perfectly, just well enough that nobody bothered looking closer. The roll had existed for years, maybe decades. I searched every inspection report connected to abandoned properties. 37 houses, 9 warehouses, 1 closed care home, 1 forgotten rail office. Every location shared another detail. Woman connected to each address had later been declared dead, missing, or legally untraceable, not all at once, spread across 24 years, too slow for anyone to notice, too organized to be coincidence. Then I remembered the storage boxes beneath the farmhouse. Every box held an entire identity, driver's licenses, record with family photographs, personal journals. Whoever controlled those boxes could become anyone. Disappear, start over. Leave nothing behind. My phone vibrated. An unknown number. I answered immediately. No greeting. No introduction. Only breathing. Then a woman's frightened voice whispered through the speaker. "I found your card." I sat upright. "My name is Rachel." The name hit me instantly. Rachel. One of the labels inside the hidden basement. She continued before I could speak. "They've been watching my apartment for 3 nights." My heart pounded. "Where are you now? I'm hiding." "Listen carefully," I said. "Don't go home." Too late. A car door slammed somewhere near her. She gasped. "They're here, Rachel." Another door closed. Then footsteps, heavy, unhurried. A man's voice quietly spoke in the background. "You should have ignored the journalist." The call ended. I called back immediately. The number no longer existed. Just like every trail leading to Daniel, someone had erased it before anyone else could follow. I didn't sleep that night. Rachel's frightened voice kept replaying inside my head. She hadn't sounded confused or unstable. She sounded like someone who already knew exactly what was coming. At sunrise, I drove to the apartment building listed under her old employment records. Police cars already surrounded the entrance. Yellow tape blocked the sidewalk. An officer recognized me from Emily's case and walked over before I could ask any questions. "You know her?" he asked. "I spoke with her less than 12 hours ago." His expression changed. "When?" "Last night." He looked back toward the building. "Then you were probably the last person to hear her alive." The words landed harder than I expected. "What happened?" "Neighbor called after hearing glass break." He hesitated. "The apartment was empty." I frowned. "You just said she was dead." "We found blood." "How much?" "Enough that nobody could have walked away." "But no body." He slowly shook his head. Inside, Rachel's apartment looked strangely organized despite the broken window. Furniture remained untouched. Pictures still hung perfectly straight. Her purse sat beside the front door. Cuss rested inside a small ceramic bowl. Nothing suggested someone had packed to leave. Then I noticed something sitting on the kitchen table. A folded piece of paper. My name covered the front. The officer handed it to me after confirming it belonged to the investigation. Inside was a single handwritten sentence. "If you're reading this, they arrived sooner than I expected." Beneath the message rested a tiny storage key with the number 214 stamped across the metal. No address, no explanation, just a key. An hour later, I located the matching storage facility on the edge of Millhaven. Unit 214 stood at the end of a quiet row. The manager unlocked it after checking Rachel's rental agreement. She had paid in cash every month for almost 4 years. The metal door rolled upward with a loud scrape. Boxes filled the room from floor to ceiling. Not ordinary moving boxes, Akari boxes. Each carried dates, names, case numbers, photographs. Rachel hadn't been hiding from Daniel. She had been investigating him for years. A desk lamp stood in one corner beside stacks of notebooks. Maps covered the walls, red string connected abandoned houses, rail lines, care homes, and dozens of women whose identities had somehow vanished from official records. Everything I had discovered, Rachel had discovered first. Then I found the newest notebook lying open across the desk. The final page had been written only hours earlier. Daniel never works alone. Below that sentence appeared 7 first names. Each one had a line drawn through it. Only one remained untouched. Ryan. My name at the bottom of the page. Rachel had added one final warning. If my name disappears next, don't trust anyone carrying official identification. I read the sentence 3 times. Rachel hadn't written it to frighten me. She'd written it because she believed she wouldn't survive long enough to explain. The notebooks covered almost every wall inside the storage unit. Each one documented another woman whose life had slowly unraveled before her official records somehow ended up in Daniel's network. Missing driver's licenses, medical files, bank accounts, birth certificates. Nothing disappeared overnight. Everything happened one small piece at a time. Rachel had even created timelines. Emily's file alone stretched across 16 pages. The gray pickup appeared 5 months before the crash. Strange phone calls started 3 months later. Her online banking password changed without her knowledge. Someone requested a replacement driver's license using her information. 2 weeks before the accident, an insurance policy worth $500,000 suddenly listed a new emergency contact. Daniel, not by full name. Only Daniel Rachel had circled that page several times. Beside it, she wrote one question: who approves paperwork without checking identity? That question sent me back toward the county offices. If someone had quietly replaced records over many years, they couldn't have done it alone. Somebody inside the system had been helping. The clerk who greeted me looked familiar, middle-aged, friendly. She smiled as though we'd met before. "Back again?" she asked. "I need every document connected to Emily Carter's insurance claim." Her smile faded for only a second. "I'm sorry." She turned toward her computer. "Those files were transferred yesterday." "Transferred where?" "I don't know." "Who requested them?" She clicked through several screens before frowning. "There isn't a request listed." "Then why are they gone?" She looked genuinely confused. "They shouldn't be." As she searched again, another employee quietly stepped into the room carrying 2 cardboard archive boxes. He froze when he saw me. Our eyes met for barely a second. Then he quickly looked away. Something about him felt familiar. Not his face, his walk, calm, unhurried, exactly like the footsteps inside Warehouse 7. Without thinking, I followed him into the hallway. He rounded one corner, then another. By the time I reached the records elevator, he had disappeared. Only the elevator doors slowly closed. I rushed forward and pressed the button. Too late. The display stopped in the underground archive level. Security required a staff access card. I waited. Nearly 6 minutes later, the elevator returned. No employee, no archive boxes, nothing. Back upstairs, the clerk apologized again. I found something strange. She turned the monitor toward me. Emily's insurance claim still existed. So did every supporting document. Only one page had been removed, the approval form, the section showing who authorized the payout. Someone hadn't erased the entire file. They had erased a single signature. The same careful method appeared everywhere. Never destroy everything. Only remove the one piece connecting every story. Rachel understood that pattern long before I did. Now, I had a feeling someone knew I was beginning to understand it too. Story 2. The first time anyone noticed something was wrong, the forest had already gone quiet. Not silent in the peaceful way people imagine when they think about nature, but empty. Birds stopped calling. Wind barely touched the pine trees. Even the insects seemed to disappear, leaving behind a strange stillness that settled over the mountains like a heavy blanket. Veteran Park Ranger Ethan Cole had spent nearly 25 years working those trails, and he trusted the woods more than he trusted people. Whenever the forest became that quiet, something had changed. It always meant trouble. The missing hiker was only 17 years old. His name was Noah Bennett, and he had planned a simple weekend trip with 2 friends inside Black Ridge National Park. They set up camp before sunset, cooked dinner, laughed around a small fire, and agreed to start hiking again after breakfast. According to the boys who survived, Noah woke before dawn, saying he wanted to photograph the morning fog from a nearby overlook. He took his camera, zipped up his jacket, smiled once, and walked into the trees. That was the last confirmed sighting of him. Meech teams arrived before noon. Helicopters circled overhead. Volunteers spread across marked trails. Rescue dogs followed Noah's scent until they suddenly stopped near an old creek crossing. His footprints continued for almost a mile through soft mud, then ended without warning. There were no signs of a struggle, no blood, no torn clothing, no animal tracks. It looked as though someone had simply lifted him from the ground and carried him away, without leaving a single mark behind. Ranger Ethan studied those footprints for several minutes before quietly asking everyone else to step back. Something about them felt wrong. Noah's boot prints were clear and easy to follow, but another set surrounded them, bare feet, adult-sized. They appeared only every few yards, always facing the same direction as Noah, as if someone had been walking beside him just outside his line of sight. Ethan didn't mention the second trail in his official report. Instead, he photographed every print himself, slipped the memory card into his pocket, and continued leading the search. Years later, when people asked why he retired so suddenly, he always gave the same answer. "The report tells you where we looked," he would say quietly. "It never tells you what we found." The official search lasted 6 days. More than 60 volunteers walked the trails. State police brought in helicopters equipped with thermal cameras. Search dogs covered nearly every marked path inside Black Ridge National Park. Rangers checked abandoned cabins, rocky cliffs, narrow caves, and every stream within 15 miles of Noah Bennett's last known location. Nothing, not a backpack, not a camera, not even another footprint after the muddy creek crossing. By the 7th morning, reporters had already gathered outside the park entrance. Television crews stood beside satellite trucks, while worried families waited behind temporary barricades, hoping someone would walk out of the trees with good news. Nobody did. Ranger Ethan Cole avoided every camera. He preferred the forest to interviews. 25 years in the park had taught him that nature rarely explained itself, and people rarely accepted the truth when it did. Still, something about Noah's disappearance refused to leave his mind. Every evening, after the volunteers returned home, Ethan quietly hiked back to the creek alone. He never told anyone. The muddy footprints were long gone after several days of rain, yet he remembered exactly where they had ended. He stood there for nearly an hour, studying the trees instead of the ground. The forest looked perfectly ordinary: tall pines, fallen branches, soft moths covering old stones, yet the silence remained. No birds, no squirrels, nothing. It was as if every living creature avoided that small stretch of land. Late on the 8th evening, Ethan noticed something that hadn't been there before. A bright orange hiking whistle hung from a low tree branch. He recognized it immediately. It belonged to Noah Meach. Teams had crossed that exact spot dozens of times. The whistle couldn't have been missed. Or something had placed it there after the search began. Ethan carefully slipped it into an evidence bag before looking around once more. The woods stayed perfectly still. Then, somewhere far ahead, a single whistle answered. Short, clear, 3 quick notes, exactly the emergency signal hikers were taught to use when they needed help. Ethan froze. Another whistle echoed through the trees, same pattern. Closer this time. Without thinking, he answered with Noah's whistle. 3 sharp blasts. Silence followed. Nearly 30 seconds passed. Then came a reply. Not 3 whistles. Just one, long, slow, almost disappointed. Ethan's radio suddenly crackled to life. Dispatch called his name twice before the signal dissolved into static. He tried answering. Nothing. The radio was dead. For the first time in his career, Ethan considered turning back. Instead, he tightened his backpack, switched on his flashlight, and quietly stepped off the marked trail toward the place where the final whistle had come from. Years later, he would tell only one person that crossing that invisible line was the greatest mistake he had ever made. The beam from Ethan's flashlight swept slowly across the trees as he left the marked trail behind. The thick branches blocked the moonlight, turning the forest into a maze of dark shapes and long shadows. Every step felt heavier than the last, not because the ground was difficult, but because the silence had become almost impossible to ignore. No birds, no wind, not even the sound of insects, only his boots pressing softly into damp earth. About 200 yards ahead, the trees opened into a small clearing. Ethan stopped. A bright orange backpack rested in the middle of the grass. It belonged to Noah. He recognized the torn shoulder strap from the missing persons poster. The bag looked clean, too clean. After more than a week in the woods, it should have been soaked with rain, covered in dirt, or dragged away by animals. Instead, it looked as though someone had placed it there only minutes earlier. Ethan knelt beside it. Inside, he found a water bottle, a folded map, an unopened energy bar. No camera, no phone, no signs of blood. The backpack was almost untouched. His radio suddenly hissed. A weak voice pushed through the static. "Ranger Cole," the signal faded. "Can you hear me?" Ethan grabbed the radio. "This is Cole. Go ahead." Nothing, only static. Then another voice came through. This one wasn't dispatch. It sounded younger, almost frightened. "Please don't leave me." Ethan's heart skipped. He knew that voice. No, it was faint but unmistakable. "I'm here," Ethan shouted into the darkness. "Keep talking." Silence answered him. He turned slowly, trying to locate where the sound had come from. North. No, east. It seemed to move every time he listened. Then he noticed fresh footprints leading away from the clearing. Hiking boots, same size as Noah's. The prints looked fresh enough to have been made within the last hour. Hope replaced caution. If Noah was alive, every second mattered. Ethan followed the trail through thick pine trees until the footprints suddenly stopped beside an enormous fallen log. Nothing continued beyond it. He searched the ground with his flashlight. No return tracks, no animal prints, no broken branches, It looked exactly like the creek crossing from 8 days earlier. The trail simply ended. A cold breeze slipped through the trees for the first time all night. Along with it came another whistle. 3 short blasts. This time it sounded close enough to touch. Ethan slowly raised his flashlight toward the darkness ahead. A figure stood between 2 pine trees. Youngling, wearing an orange hiking jacket. Noah? Ethan called softly. The figure didn't move. It only stood there with its head slightly lowered. Relief washed over him. He took one careful step forward, then another. Just as he lifted his flashlight higher, the face looking back at him wasn't Noah's. It was someone much older, and they were smiling. The face looking back at him wasn't Noah's. It was someone much older, and they were smiling. Ethan froze where he stood. The flashlight trembled slightly in his hand, sending the beam across the stranger's weathered face. Deep lines covered his cheeks. His gray beard reached the middle of his chest. The faded orange hiking jacket looked decades old, its fabric sun-bleached and patched so many times that almost none of the original material remained. "Sir?" Ethan called. No answer. The old man simply watched him. "You shouldn't be out here." Still nothing. Ethan took another careful step. The stranger slowly lifted one hand, not to wave, not to point, just enough for Ethan to notice something hanging from his fingers. A ranger badge, old brass scratched, covered in dirt. Ethan's stomach tightened. Black Ridge had lost only one ranger while on duty, 31 years earlier. His name had been Thomas Granger. Official reports claimed he disappeared during a rescue after a violent storm. Hundreds of volunteers searched for him. They never found a body. The old man opened his mouth. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded dry, almost unused. Ethan frowned. "Who?" The stranger looked toward the trees instead of answering. "They learn your name first." A gust of wind passed through the clearing. For the first time all evening, branches moved overhead. Then came another whistle. 3 short blasts. This time it echoed from behind Ethan. He turned immediately. Nothing. When he faced forward again, the old man had vanished. There was nowhere he could have gone. The clearing stretched in every direction. No fresh footprints marked the damp ground. Only Ethan's own boot prints remained. His flashlight landed on the spot where the stranger had been standing. The ranger badge rested alone in the grass. He picked up carefully. The engraved name was almost impossible to read beneath years of wear. Homus Granger Badge number 14. Ethan slipped it into his jacket pocket. His radio crackled again. This time the signal came through perfectly. "Cole, report your location." It was dispatch clear. "Calm normal." Ethan pressed the transmit button. "I found something." "What did you find?" Before he could answer, another voice whispered close to his left ear. So did he. Ethan spun around. Nobody stood there. The whisper had been close enough that he felt warm breath against his neck. His radio hissed once more. Dix sounded different now, more urgent. "Cole, leave the woods." Static interrupted the message. Then one final sentence forced every muscle in Ethan's body to lock in place. "Whatever answers you hear, don't answer back." The transmission ended. A long freight train horn rolled across the mountains. Moments later, someone answered it with 3 slow whistles from somewhere deep inside the forest. Ethan didn't move. Every rescue ranger knew that signal. 3 whistles meant someone needed help. It was the first thing new volunteers learned before joining a search team. But something about this reply felt wrong. Too steady, too patient, almost as if whoever made it already knew Ethan would understand. He switched off his flashlight. Darkness swallowed the clearing. For a few seconds, he simply listened. The whistle didn't come again. Instead, he heard footsteps, slow, measured, circling somewhere beyond the trees, not approaching, not leaving, just moving around him. Ethan crouched beside the fallen log, letting his eyes adjust to the darkness. Another sound drifted through the forest, voices, several of them, too quiet to understand. They seemed to rise and fall together, almost like people having a distant conversation, yet no individual words reached him, only murmurs. The strange chorus continued for nearly a minute before stopping all at once. Silence returned. Then his radio clicked. Cole. Dispatch again. I'm here. No answer. Cole. The same voice repeated his name, exactly the same tone, exactly the same pause like a recording. He slowly lowered the radio. Real dispatch operators never repeated themselves that way. A branch snapped somewhere behind him. Ethan turned. Nothing. Another snap, this time closer. He raised the flashlight but kept it switched off. Something moved between the pines, only a shadow. Too tall to identify. It disappeared before the moonlight reached it. Then another shadow crossed farther away, and another. None of them walked. They simply appeared between the trees for a heartbeat before fading into darkness again. Ethan counted 4, maybe 5. He couldn't be certain. A cold breeze carried the smell of smoke. Not fresh smoke, old smoke like damp ashes after rain. It reminded him of abandoned campsites he had found years earlier, only stronger, much stronger. His hand brushed against the old ranger badge inside his jacket pocket. Without thinking, he pulled it out. Moonlight reflected across the worn brass. Something caught his attention. The back of the badge had tiny letters carved into the metal, not an official marking. Someone had scratched them there by hand. Don't follow the voices. Ethan stared at the words. Thomas Granger hadn't disappeared without leaving a warning. He had expected someone else to find that badge. A sudden beam of light flashed through the trees. Another flashlight, far ahead. Someone waved it slowly from left to right. Then came a familiar voice. Ethan. He knew it immediately. Mark Sullivan. His partner. Relief flooded through him. Mark. The light stopped moving. I'm over here. Ethan stepped forward, then remembered the message carved into the badge. Don't follow the voices. He looked toward the light again. Mark, he called. Tell me something. What? What did we eat before today's search started? Silence. 5 long seconds passed. Then the voice answered. We didn't have breakfast. Ethan's blood ran cold. That morning, before sunrise, Mark had complained for 10 straight minutes about burnt pancakes in the ranger station kitchen. There was no chance he would have forgotten. The light blinked once. The voice came again. Closer now. Ethan, it sounded exactly like Mark, except Mark had never spoken with that slow, empty smile hiding behind every word. Ethan took one careful step backward instead of forward. The flashlight, shining between the trees, stayed perfectly still. So did the voice. Ethan, another pause. We've been looking everywhere for you. It sounded exactly like his partner. The same deep tone, the same calm rhythm, but something tiny was missing. Mark always breathed heavily after hiking uphill. This voice didn't breathe at all. Ethan tightened his grip on the old ranger badge. His radio suddenly burst with loud static. Then another voice broke through. This one sounded rushed, panicked. Cole, if you can hear me, answer now. That was Mark, the real one. His words stumbled over each other exactly the way they always did whenever he was worried. I'm here, Ethan shouted into the radio. Static swallowed his reply. The voice ahead called again. Ethan, come on, it was closer now. Too close. Without making a sound, Ethan switched his flashlight back on and aimed it toward the waiting figure. The beam reached the trees. No one stood there. Only the flashlight, balanced upright on a fallen stump, still glowing. No person, no footprints leading away. Nothing. The voice had disappeared. A cold shiver ran through him. Someone, or something, had wanted him to walk into those trees. He slowly approached the abandoned flashlight. It belonged to the Park Service. The name printed across the side had almost faded away. T.T. Granger, Thomas Granger, the missing ranger. Ethan stared at it in disbelief. The batteries should have died decades ago, yet the light burned with steady brightness. His radio crackled once more. Cole. Mark again. Loud and clear. Ethan answered. This time the signal held. Thank God. Where are you? We've been trying to reach you for almost an hour. Ethan looked at his watch. Only 23 minutes had passed since entering the clearing. You've got the time wrong, he said. No. Mark sounded confused. You've been missing since sunset. Ethan's heartbeat quickened. Sunset? It couldn't be. He raised his wrist toward the flashlight. The watch had stopped. The hands remained frozen at 8:17 phone. No signal. The battery showed a full charge. Then, without warning, the screen lit up by itself. One new notification appeared. No number, no contact. Only a photograph. It showed the exact clearing where Ethan stood. The picture had been taken from high above, looking down through the trees. He was visible in the center, standing beside Thomas Granger's flashlight. Someone had circled him with a thick red marker. Below the image, a single sentence had been typed, "No, he knows your name." A branch cracked somewhere behind him. Another followed. Then another. Ethan slowly turned. Lights, dozens of them. Small beams drifted silently through the forest, weaving between the trees as if an entire search party were walking toward him. Relief almost reached him until he realized something impossible. Every flashlight moved at exactly the same speed. Every beam stopped at exactly the same moment. And when the lights finally settled, every person holding them looked exactly like Ranger Thomas Granger. Ethan forgot to breathe. There had to be at least 20 figures standing between the trees, same weathered face, same faded orange jacket, same brass badge catching the moonlight. None of them blinked, none of them spoke. They simply watched. A lifetime spent in the wilderness had taught Ethan that panic usually made bad situations worse. He forced himself to stay still, listening for anything that sounded normal. Leaves, whined an owl. Anything, nothing came. Then, without warning, every flashlight switched off at the same instant. Darkness swallowed the forest. Ethan instinctively reached for his own light and clicked it back on. The beam swept across the clearing. Every figure had vanished. Only the trees remained. His breathing echoed louder than the wind ever could. Cole! Mark's voice burst through the radio again. This time it sounded stronger. We've got your location. You do? Stay where you are. Relief washed over Ethan, finally. Real help. He looked toward the trail he had entered from and waited. A few moments later, he spotted lights weaving through the trees. Unlike the others, these beams bounced naturally with each step. Someone was actually walking. Branches snapped, equipment rattled, people whispered, everything sounded real. "Ethan," Mark shouted, "I'm here!" Within seconds, 3 rangers stepped into the clearing. Mark reached him first. "You okay?" Ethan nodded, though he wasn't sure it was true. "You've been gone almost 6 hours." It wasn't 6. Mark frowned. "Ethan," he lowered his voice, "we came looking because your emergency beacon activated. I never touched it." Mark clipped the beacon from Ethan's backpack. The red emergency light flashed steadily. It had been broadcasting for hours. Ethan stared at it in disbelief. "I swear I never turned it on. I know." Mark looked uneasy. That's not the strange part. He pointed toward the ground. The clearing where Ethan had stood alone moments earlier was now covered with footprints. Not one set, not two, dozens. Every print belonged to the same pair of old ranger boots. They surrounded Ethan in a perfect circle. None led into the clearing, none led out. One of the younger rangers quietly counted them. 23. Nobody spoke after that. Mark finally broke the silence. "We're leaving." No one argued. The team walked back toward the main trail without stopping. Ethan remained near the middle of the group, trying not to look behind him. About 15 minutes later, they reached the creek crossing where Noah's original footprints had ended. The entire team stopped. Fresh boot prints crossed the mud ahead. They had appeared while the group was walking. Every print matched the pattern surrounding Ethan in the clearing. Mark slowly raised his flashlight. The trail stretched into darkness. At the very end of the beam stood a lone figure in an old orange ranger jacket. It raised one hand, then pointed deeper into the forest, not inviting them, warning them the next second. It was gone. Nobody chased it. Mark lowered his flashlight and looked back at the rest of the team. Every ranger wore the same uneasy expression. They had all seen the figure. Nobody questioned whether it had been real. "We're leaving," Mark said quietly. This time his voice wasn't a suggestion. It was an order. The team continued toward the trailhead without speaking. Every few minutes, Ethan glanced over his shoulder, expecting another flashlight to appear between the trees. Nothing followed them, at least, nothing they could see. They reached the ranger station just after 2 in the morning. The search headquarters buzzed with quiet activity. Coffee cups covered folding tables. Maps hung from every wall. Volunteers rested wherever they could find space, hoping daylight would finally bring Noah home. Mark closed the office door behind them. "What happened out there?" Ethan hesitated. He thought about the old ranger, the impossible voices, the identical figures, the badge. Nobody would believe any of it. "I found Noah's backpack," he finally said. Mark nodded. "We already heard?" "No." Ethan placed the backpack on the desk. "I found it where someone wanted me to." Before Mark could answer, another ranger entered carrying a sealed evidence bag. "We recovered this beside the creek. Inside rested Noah's camera. The memory card was still inside." Everyone gathered around a computer while the images loaded. The first photographs looked normal. Morning sunlight through pine trees, a small waterfall, his friends making breakfast, birds sitting on low branches, nothing unusual. Then the pictures changed. Noah had apparently turned the camera toward the trail behind him. Dodge after image showed an empty path, until photograph number 43, a man stood between 2 trees, old gray beard, orange ranger jacket, Thomas Granger. The timestamp showed the photograph had been taken almost 30 years after Granger officially disappeared. Nobody spoke. The next image appeared. The old ranger had moved closer, still smiling. Then another, closer again. Every photograph reduced the distance between them. Noah never appeared to notice. He kept photographing the scenery ahead while Granger silently followed behind. The final picture filled the screen. Noah had accidentally switched the camera into selfie mode. His face smiled toward the lens. Standing directly behind him wasn't Thomas Granger. It was Ethan. Wearing today's ranger uniform, the room fell completely silent. Mark slowly looked away from the monitor, then toward Ethan. "Where were you when this picture was taken?" Ethan stared at the timestamp. The date matched exactly. The image had been captured 6 days before Noah disappeared. Ethan's stomach dropped. He had been attending a wilderness safety conference nearly 200 miles away that entire week. More than 50 rangers could confirm it. He had never met Noah Bennett. Yet there he was. Standing close enough to touch him, one volunteer quietly backed away from the computer. Another crossed himself, then the oldest ranger in the room whispered something almost too softly to hear. It chose another one. Every head slowly turned toward him. He looked at Ethan with genuine pity. I hoped I'd never see it happen again. Nobody in the room spoke. The older ranger kept his eyes on Ethan as though he had seen this moment before. Mark finally broke the silence. What do you mean, again? The man slowly removed his glasses and rubbed his tired eyes. My father worked this park before I did. He paused. He told me there were places where the forest remembered people. A few volunteers exchanged uncertain looks. The old ranger continued anyway. Not memories. People. Mark folded his arms. That's impossible. So is that photograph. Nobody argued. The picture still filled the computer screen. Ethan standing behind Noah, 6 days before they had supposedly ever met. The older ranger walked closer to the monitor. He pointed toward the corner of the image. The technician enlarged the photograph. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Then everyone noticed it, Ethan's shadow. It stretched across the ground in the wrong direction. The morning sun should have cast every shadow toward the west. Everyone else's did. Only Ethan's reached east. As if light wasn't touching him the same way. A heavy silence settled over the room. The older ranger whispered. My father called them echoes. Echoes of what? Mark asked. We never found out. He swallowed hard. They look like people. They sound like people. They even remember things only those people should know. He glanced toward Ethan. But eventually, they stopped pretending. Before anyone could ask another question, the station lights flickered. Once, twice. Then every computer screen suddenly turned black. The emergency generator started a second later. Monitors slowly came back to life. The photograph had disappeared, not deleted. Replaced, the folder containing Noah's camera was completely empty. Every image had vanished. The technician stared at the keyboard. I didn't touch anything. He searched every drive. Nothing. Hundreds of photographs. Gone. Only one file remained, untitled, no timestamp, no camera information. Mark opened it. A short video began playing. The recording showed the ranger station parking lot. Today's date appeared across the bottom. The camera slowly zoomed toward the entrance. A white Park Service truck pulled into the lot. Ethan climbed out. Everyone watched in complete silence. The video continued. Another white truck entered the frame 30 seconds later. An identical Ethan stepped out. Same uniform, same backpack, same face. The two men walked in opposite directions. Neither acknowledged the other. The recording ended. Nobody moved. Nobody even breathed. Mark slowly looked toward Ethan, then toward the parking lot outside the window. Only one truck remained. Only one Ethan stood inside the station. But somewhere beyond the glass, someone wearing his face had already driven away. The investigation officially ended 3 weeks later. Noah Bennett was never found. The case file remained open for almost a year before quietly being moved into storage with hundreds of other unsolved disappearances. The newspaper stories faded. Volunteers returned home. Reporters stopped calling. Only Ethan refused to speak. He handed in his ranger badge less than a month after the search and never worked another rescue. Years passed before he finally agreed to one interview. The reporter asked the question everyone wanted answered. What really happened out there? Ethan looked toward the forest outside his window for a long time before replying. The report tells you where we searched. It doesn't tell you who came back. He ended the interview immediately afterward. When the journalist later contacted Black Ridge National Park for comment, officials confirmed only one detail. Ranger Ethan Cole had indeed resigned after Noah's disappearance. Nothing more today. Visitors still hike those same trails. Most return with photographs of waterfalls, mountains, and quiet forests. A few come back with something else. An extra face standing between the trees, always wearing an old orange ranger jacket, always smiling. And if you ever hear 3 slow whistles echo through Black Ridge after sunset, the oldest rangers all give the same advice. Don't answer, because the rescue party might already be looking for you. Asterisk Story 3. Asterisk Daniel and his wife, Claire, thought they had found the perfect weekend escape. The Airbnb listing showed a quiet farmhouse surrounded by endless fields, glowing warmly beneath a sky full of stars. Hundreds of 5-star reviews praised the peaceful location, the spotless rooms, and the friendly host who always replied within minutes. Yet nobody mentioned ever meeting him. Before we settle in, let our little Knight family know you're here. Leave your first name, where you're listening from, and your local time in the comments. I'm Ryan, the real Ryan, and tonight you'll hear why some reservations should never be accepted. Let's begin. Daniel completed the booking almost without thinking. The photographs looked exactly like the kind of place they needed after months of long workdays and crowded city streets. A white farmhouse stood alone beside rolling fields, wrapped by old oak trees that turned golden every evening. The listing promised complete privacy, fast internet, fresh coffee, and a fireplace already prepared for arriving guests. The host replied less than a minute after the reservation was confirmed. Looking forward to welcoming you. The key will be waiting. Drive safely. There was no name beneath the message. Only host. Claire noticed it first. That's strange. Daniel smiled. Maybe they like their privacy. She shrugged. So do I. They left early Friday morning. The drive took nearly 4 hours, carrying them farther from busy highways and crowded towns than either expected. Cell service became weaker with every passing mile until the navigation app finally stopped updating altogether. Fortunately, the directions printed inside the booking confirmation were surprisingly detailed. Turn left at the old grain elevator. Continue past the abandoned church. Cross the narrow wooden bridge. The farmhouse will be the only house at the end of the road. Every landmark appeared exactly where the directions said it would. By sunset, they reached the property. It looked identical to the photographs: white walls, black roof, wide front porch, soft yellow lights glowing through the windows. The key rested beneath a flower pot, exactly where the message had promised. Everything felt effortless. Inside, the house was spotless. Fresh towels waited in the bathroom. A fire already crackled inside the stone fireplace. Someone had even left homemade cookies on the kitchen counter with a handwritten note, "Welcome. Make yourselves comfortable." Claire smiled. I've never had an Airbnb this nice. It almost felt less like a rental and more like arriving at someone else's home while they had stepped out only moments earlier. As they unpacked, Daniel noticed an old guest book resting on a wooden table. Visitors had been signing it for years. Every page carried cheerful messages. Beautiful weekend. Can't wait to come back. Best host we've ever had. 5 peaceful days. Hundreds of entries. Hundreds of different families. Yet every single thank you note ended the same way. Thank you, Daniel laughed quietly. What are the chances? Claire looked up. What? The host has the same name as me. She walked over and flipped through several pages. That's funny. Then she frowned. Actually, she turned the book toward him. I don't think that's the host's name. Daniel looked closer. Every guest thanked Daniel, not our host, just Daniel. Neither of them noticed the security camera mounted above the living room bookshelf. Its tiny red light blinked once, then stayed on. Claire noticed it first. Was that there before? Daniel looked toward the bookshelf. The camera was small enough to disappear against the dark wood, but now that they had seen it, neither could ignore it. It's probably part of the security system, he said. I guess. She didn't sound convinced. Daniel opened the Airbnb listing on his phone to check whether indoor cameras had been disclosed. No signal. He walked toward the front window. Still nothing. Even the home's Wi-Fi had disappeared from the available networks. That's strange. The internet was one of the reasons we booked this place, Claire replied. Daniel restarted his phone. Nothing changed. He decided it could wait until morning. The fireplace kept the living room warm. Rain had started tapping softly against the windows, and the farmhouse felt peaceful despite the missing connection. As they settled onto the couch, Claire picked up the guest book again. I want to see how old this place really is. She flipped backward through dozens of pages. Every year looked normal: families, couples, weekend trips, birthday celebrations. Then she reached an entry dated 15 years earlier. The handwriting looked different, older, more careful. Yet the final line remained exactly the same. Thank you, Daniel. Another page, 20 years earlier, the same sentence. Another, 26 years earlier. Agan, thank you, Daniel. Claire slowly closed the book. Either this owner has hosted people forever, or something isn't right. Daniel forced a smile. Maybe the property has stayed in the same family. Before Claire could answer, a notification appeared on Daniel's phone. No signal, no internet, yet somehow a new Airbnb message had arrived. I hope you're comfortable. Please don't go into the basement, Daniel frowned. We never asked about a basement. Claire looked toward the kitchen. I didn't even know there was one. The message disappeared almost as quickly as it appeared. No sender, no conversation history, just gone. Daniel searched every room downstairs, living room, kitchen, laundry room, nothing, no basement door, no staircase, no locked storage room. It must have been sent by mistake, he said. Claire nodded, though her eyes kept drifting toward the floor. If you're enjoying tonight's story, subscribe before you fall asleep. There are many more slow-burning mysteries waiting for you, and I'd love to have you back tomorrow night. A loud knock echoed through the farmhouse. Both of them looked toward the front door. 3 slow knocks. Daniel checked the clock. 11:47 p.m. Nobody should have been visiting a farmhouse that sat miles from the nearest road. He opened the curtain just enough to look outside. The porch was empty. No car, no person. Only the rocking chair near the front steps, still moving gently, as if someone had just stood up and walked away. Daniel opened the front door. Cool night air drifted across the porch. The fields stretched endlessly beneath a pale moon, broken only by rows of old fence posts disappearing into the darkness. There wasn't another house in sight. No headlights crossed the distant hills. No footsteps echoed across the gravel driveway. Whoever had knocked was gone. Claire stepped outside beside him. Did you see anyone? He slowly shook his head. No. The rocking chair continued moving for another few seconds before finally coming to rest. Daniel walked to the edge of the porch and swept his flashlight across the yard. Nothing, just tall grass swaying gently in the breeze. As he turned back toward the house, something caught his attention. Fresh footprints. They led from the driveway to the porch steps, bare feet. The ground was still damp from the evening rain, making each print perfectly clear. Daniel followed them with the flashlight. Every footprint stopped at the bottom step. None continued onto the porch. None turned away. It looked as though someone had simply disappeared before climbing the stairs. Claire quietly whispered, "Let's go inside." He didn't argue. The front door locked with a heavy click behind them. Daniel checked every window, every latch. Everything was secure. Trying to calm themselves, they made tea and sat beside the fireplace. The silence inside the farmhouse felt heavier now. Neither wanted to admit it, but both were listening for another knock. Instead, a soft chime came from Daniel's phone. Another message. No signal. No internet. Still, the notification appeared. "Thank you for checking outside." Most guests do. Daniel's hands froze. Claire slowly looked up. "Did it just—" He nodded. Without opening the message, another appeared beneath it. "Please don't be frightened." Then another. "You're both exactly where you're supposed to be." Daniel immediately grabbed the house key from the kitchen counter. "We're leaving." Claire didn't hesitate. They hurried toward the front door. The key slid into the lock. It turned halfway, then stopped. Daniel tried again. Nothing. He unlocked it, locked it again, unlocked it once more. The handle refused to move. Claire pulled with both hands. The door wouldn't open. Daniel rushed to the back entrance. Same result. Every window remained firmly shut. None of them had bars. Appeared damaged, yet nothing moved. The farmhouse suddenly felt much smaller than before. Then, from somewhere beneath the wooden floor, a slow knock echoed upward. One knock, a pause. Then another. Both of them stared at the floorboards. A third knock followed. Not from the front door, not from outside. From directly underneath the living room. Claire took one slow step backward. Daniel looked toward the fireplace. The heavy rug lying beneath the coffee table had shifted slightly, just enough to reveal the corner of a narrow wooden hatch they both could have sworn hadn't been there earlier. Remembering the message, Daniel felt his stomach tighten. There really was a basement, and whatever had been knocking was waiting below. Neither of them moved. The fire crackled softly behind them while the farmhouse settled with the quiet sounds old houses often make. Normally, those little creaks felt harmless. Tonight, every one of them sounded like a careful footstep. Claire broke the silence first. "We're not opening that," Daniel agreed immediately. "No." He dragged the coffee table across the rug, covering the wooden hatch completely. "There." Claire managed a weak smile. "That makes me feel maybe 1% better." Daniel tried the front door again. Still locked. The back door refused to move. Every window remained sealed shut, even though none of them appeared to have locks engaged anymore. It didn't make sense. Then the lights flickered once. Twice the fireplace went dark. The lamps switched off. Only moonlight spilled through the windows. For several seconds, the farmhouse was completely silent. Then, a warm yellow glow slowly returned, not from the lamps. From the hallway, a single light had turned on by itself. Daniel frowned. "We left that off." Claire nodded. "I know." Together, they walked toward the hallway. The light came from a small room they hadn't noticed earlier. The door stood half open. Inside sat an old wooden desk, a rocking chair, and dozens of framed photographs covering every wall. Families, couples, children. Every picture had been taken on the front porch of the farmhouse. Each family smiled at the camera. Each photograph had a date neatly written beneath it. The years stretched across more than 3 decades. Claire stepped closer. "They're all guests." Daniel noticed something else. None of the photographs showed a host. Only visitors. His eyes stopped on the newest frame. The date read, "Tomorrow." His heart skipped. Slowly, He lifted the photograph from the wall. It showed the farmhouse exactly as it looked tonight. The porch light glowed softly. The rocking chair faced the yard. Standing on the front steps were Daniel and Claire, wearing the same clothes, holding the same overnight bags. Even Claire's blue scarf rested over her shoulder exactly as it did now. The picture had already been printed. Framed, hung on the wall, before either of them had arrived, Claire whispered without taking her eyes off it. "Who took this?" Daniel couldn't answer, because in the corner of the photograph, just beyond the porch light, someone stood watching them from the darkness. Their face had been carefully scratched away. Only one thing remained untouched: a small handwritten label beneath the frame, "Welcome home, Daniel." Neither of them slept that night. They remained in the living room until sunrise, watching the front door, listening to the house breathe around them. No more knocks came from beneath the floor. No more messages appeared on Daniel's phone. As the first light reached the fields outside, the front door unlocked with a soft click. Without saying a word, they gathered their bags and left. The drive back felt strangely short. Once they reached the highway, cell service returned immediately. Daniel opened the Airbnb app, ready to report everything. The listing was gone. He searched the farmhouse by name, nothing. He searched the map, nothing. Even the reservation had disappeared from his account, as though the trip had never happened. Only one thing remained: the payment. It had been sent to someone simply listed as Daniel. Over the next few weeks, they contacted local authorities, hoping someone would recognize the property from the photographs they had taken before arriving. No one did. County records showed empty farmland where the farmhouse should have been. Satellite images revealed nothing except open fields. There had never been a registered home at those coordinates. Months passed. Life slowly returned to normal, or at least it tried to. Then one evening, Claire received an email, no subject, no sender. Attached was a single photograph. It showed the farmhouse porch at sunset. The rocking chair was gently moving. Daniel stood in the doorway. He smiled directly at the camera. Claire stared at the picture for several seconds before quietly calling her husband into the room. He looked at the image, then looked back at her. "I've never seen this before." She believed him, because the man standing on that porch wasn't wearing the clothes Daniel had on that weekend. He was wearing clothes Daniel owned now: new jacket, new boots. The photograph had somehow been taken only days earlier. Claire deleted the email. The next morning it returned. She deleted it again. It always came back, sometimes with a different subject line, sometimes with a different date. The photograph never changed. Years later, travelers still leave 5-star reviews for a peaceful farmhouse that doesn't appear on any map. Every review thanks the same host. Nobody remembers meeting him. Nobody remembers checking out. Only one sentence appears again and again beneath those reviews: "Thank you, Daniel. We'll be back soon." Story 4. Dr. Olivia Hart had spent nearly 20 years working the overnight shift inside St. Agnes Children's Hospital. She had watched thousands of children arrive frightened and leave smiling. Every hallway, every room, every quiet corner of the old building felt familiar until room 217 reopened. The room had remained empty for almost 11 years after a small electrical fire forced the hospital to renovate an entire wing. When construction finally ended, the hospital quietly placed it back into service. Nobody mentioned why nurses had always avoided that hallway before it closed. Before we settle in for tonight's final story, let our Little Night family know you're here. Leave your first name, where you're listening from, and your local time in the comments. I'm Ryan. the real Ryan, and tonight you'll hear why one hospital room was locked for more than a decade, and why some doors should probably stay closed forever. Let's begin. The renovation had finished only 3 days earlier. Fresh paint covered the walls, new lights brightened the hallway, and every room smelled faintly of clean linen and disinfectant. Hospital administrators proudly described the wing as one of the safest pediatric units in the state. Most of the staff smiled politely. Very few sounded excited. Dr. Olivia Hart noticed it during the morning briefing. Whenever someone mentioned room 217, the conversation quietly moved somewhere else. One nurse suddenly remembered paperwork. Another checked a patient's chart. Even the maintenance supervisor lowered his eyes and changed the subject. Olivia finally asked the question everyone seemed determined to avoid. "What's wrong with 217?" The room fell silent. A senior nurse named Helen forced a small smile. "Nothing." Olivia waited. Helen sighed. "You're new to this wing. I am. So I'll tell you what everyone else won't." She glanced toward the hallway before continuing. "Don't spend longer in that room than you have to." Olivia laughed softly. "That's it?" Helen didn't smile back. "I'm serious." Before Olivia could ask another question, an emergency call interrupted the meeting. A young patient had just arrived after an asthma attack. The rest of the morning passed quickly: admissions, medication rounds, family updates. Hospital life returned to its usual rhythm. Just after lunch, Olivia received her first assignment inside room 217. The patient was an 8-year-old girl named Sophie. She had broken her leg falling from a bicycle and needed overnight observation before surgery. Nothing unusual. Sophie smiled when Olivia entered. Hi, Sophie." Olivia checked her chart, adjusted the blanket, and made sure she was comfortable. Everything looked perfectly normal. Then Sophie quietly asked, "Who's the little boy outside?" Olivia looked toward the hallway. Nobody stood there. What little boy, the one watching? A cold feeling settled across Olivia's shoulders. She stepped into the hallway. Mont Caro. Nurses pushed medicine carts farther down the corridor while visitors spoke quietly near the elevators. No child stood outside room 217. When she returned, Sophie looked confused. "He left. Maybe you dreamed him." Sophie slowly shook her head. He smiled. Olivia finished the examination without mentioning it again. Children imagine things all the time, especially inside unfamiliar hospitals. Still, as she reached the doorway, she noticed something strange. The room's electronic monitor briefly flashed a name across its screen. Not Sophie Miller. Just one word, Ethan. The display corrected itself almost immediately. Olivia stared at it for several seconds before checking the patient's wristband. It clearly read Sophie Miller. She frowned. Probably a software glitch. Hospitals depended on computers. Computers made mistakes. As she walked back into the hallway, Helen was already waiting. "You saw it, didn't you?" Olivia looked at her. "The monitor." Helen slowly nodded. "It always starts with the wrong name." Helen quietly disappeared down the hallway before Olivia could stop her. Those words stayed in Olivia's mind for the rest of the afternoon. Hospitals depended on routine, charts, medication schedules, shift reports. Everything followed a careful order because mistakes could cost lives. So, when a patient's monitor displayed the wrong name, there had to be an explanation. Olivia logged into the hospital system. She searched room 217. The current record appeared exactly as expected. Pound. Nothing unusual. She searched the equipment logs. No reported software errors. No maintenance requests. No replacement history. Everything looked perfect, almost too perfect. If you're enjoying these late-night mysteries, Make sure you subscribe before you drift off. Every week, we'll settle in together with another slow-burning story to help quiet the noise at the end of the day. That evening, Olivia returned to check on Sophie before the night shift officially began. The little girl was awake, quietly coloring in a children's activity book. "Feeling any better?" Olivia asked. Sophie nodded. "My leg still hurts. I'm sorry." Olivia smiled. "It should feel much better after surgery." Sophie looked toward the hallway again. "He's back." Olivia slowly turned. The corridor remained empty. "Is he still standing there?" Sophie nodded. "He doesn't come inside." "What does he look like?" The little girl thought for a moment. "He's about my age." "What else?" "He wears old pajamas." Olivia frowned. "They're white." Another pause. "But they're dirty." A nurse suddenly called Olivia from the hallway. She stepped outside for less than a minute to answer a question about another patient. When she walked back into room 217, Sophie was staring toward the ceiling. "He says thank you." Olivia looked around. "Who does?" "The little boy." "For what?" Sophie smiled faintly. He said nobody looked at him for a long time. A chill crept across Olivia's arms before she could respond. Sophie's heart monitor gave a short beep. The screech flickered once. The patient's name disappeared. Then another name appeared, this time it stayed visible for almost 5 seconds. Long enough for Olivia to read it clearly. Then the monitor reset itself. Sophie Miller normal again. Olivia immediately photographed the screen with her phone. She wanted proof before anyone dismissed it as imagination. Moments later, she opened the picture. The monitor looked perfectly normal. No trace of Ethan Reed. Only Sophie's name. The photograph had somehow changed. She looked back at the monitor, then back at the picture. Her heartbeat quickened. The image in her phone wasn't the image she remembered taking. Just then, Helen quietly stepped into the doorway. Without asking a single question, she looked at Olivia and softly said, "You tried taking a picture, didn't you?" Olivia slowly nodded. Helen closed the door behind her. "I did the same thing 11 years ago." She took a slow breath. "And that's the night room 217 was closed." Olivia stared at Helen. "What happened?" Helen didn't answer right away. Instead, she pulled a faded employee badge from her pocket. The photograph showed a much younger version of herself standing beside another nurse. A little boy smiled between them. This was Ethan Reed. Olivia looked at the picture. He couldn't have been older than 8. "What happened to him?" Helen's voice became almost a whisper. "Ethan was admitted after a school bus accident. He survived surgery. He laughed with the nurses. He kept asking when his parents would arrive." Helen paused. "They never made it." Olivia slowly lowered the photograph. "The accident," Helen nodded. "It took his entire family." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "He stayed here for almost a week," Helen continued. "Every nurse promised someone would always be nearby." What changed? The hospital lost power during a terrible storm. Emergency generators started within seconds. But room 217 remained dark for almost 4 minutes. When the lights returned, Ethan's bed was empty. Olivia frowned. "You mean he walked away?" "No." Helen looked directly into her eyes. "The windows were locked. The hallway cameras never showed him leaving. The room was searched from top to bottom. He simply wasn't there anymore." The official report blamed confusion during the blackout. Staff searched the hospital for 2 days. Police searched the surrounding neighborhood. Nothing. No footprints, no sightings, no trace. Eventually, the room was sealed for renovations. Years passed. People transferred, records disappeared into storage. Most employees stopped talking about Ethan altogether. Then, every few years, A new patient would quietly mention a little boy standing outside room 217, always smiling, always waiting. Olivia reached for the patient chart, resting at the end of Sophie's bed. I want to read Ethan's file. Helen slowly shook her head. There isn't one anymore. What do you mean? It vanished. Every copy, paper, digital, everything. Only the photograph inside Helen's old badge remained. Before Olivia could ask another question, Sophie's soft voice interrupted them. He's inside now. Both women turned toward the bed. Sophie wasn't looking at the hallway anymore. She was looking toward the empty chair beside her bed. Her smile slowly faded. He's crying. Olivia felt every hair on her arms rise. What is he saying? Sophie listened for several seconds before answering. He says, she swallowed hard. He doesn't remember leaving. The room suddenly became colder, not freezing. Just enough for both nurses to notice. The heart monitor gave another quiet beep. Once. Twice the screen flickered. This time it didn't display Ethan's name. Instead, a second patient appeared beneath Sophie's chart, occupant 2. Ethan, read the monitor, remained unchanged. 5 seconds. 15. It wasn't a glitch anymore. Someone, or something, had just been admitted to room 217. Neither Olivia nor Helen spoke. The monitor continued displaying 2 names, occupant 1. Sophie Miller, occupant 2. Ethan Reed. Then, just as quietly as it had appeared, the second name faded away. The room returned to normal, or at least it looked normal. Helen stepped toward the monitor and switched it off. When she turned it back on, only Sophie's information appeared. I've tried that before, she said softly. It never changes anything. Olivia looked at Sophie. The little girl seemed calm again, coloring carefully inside the lines as though nothing unusual had happened. Is he still here? Olivia asked. Sophie nodded. He's sitting beside the window. What is he doing, looking outside? What does he see? Sophie smiled sadly. He keeps waiting for somebody. The answer settled heavily over the room, a child waiting for parents who would never arrive. Olivia felt a deep ache in her chest. This didn't feel frightening anymore. It felt unbearably lonely. After Sophie fell asleep, Olivia and Helen walked to the hospital archives beneath the oldest part of the building. Dust-covered shelves filled with forgotten boxes dating back decades. Most patient records had already been digitized, but the oldest files still rested inside worn cardboard cartons. Helen switched on a small desk lamp. If anything survived, it'll be here. They searched for almost an hour. Nothing. No patient file, no accident report, no surgery notes. It was as though Ethan Reed had never existed. Just as they prepared to leave, Olivia noticed a thin envelope trapped behind a loose shelf. No hospital logo, no patient number, only one handwritten word. Ethan. Inside rested a single drawing folded into quarters. A child's drawing, crayons, bright colors. The picture showed room 217, a hospital bed, a smiling nurse. A little outside the windows stood 3 people, a man, a woman, a little girl. His family, across the bottom, written in careful block letters, was one sentence. When they come back, tell them I waited. Helen quietly covered her mouth. I've never seen this before. Neither had Olivia. She carefully folded the drawing and slipped it into her pocket. The moment she did, every light inside the archive flickered once, then stopped. The air suddenly felt warmer. Not colder, warmer, almost comforting. Back upstairs, Olivia walked into room 217 one final time before ending her shift. Sophie was sleeping peacefully. Moonlight spilled across the floor beside the empty chair. Olivia took the drawing from her pocket and gently placed it on the windowsill. I found it, she whispered. No answer came, only silence. Then the curtain moved. The window was closed. There wasn't even a breeze. Yet the drawing slowly slid across the window sill and disappeared. The next morning, Room 217's monitor displayed only one patient. Sophie recovered well and went home 2 days later. From that night forward, no child ever mentioned seeing a little boy outside the room again. Today, Room 217 remains open. Doctors work there every day. Nurses pass through without a second thought. But every year, on the anniversary of the old storm, someone leaves a child's crayon drawing on the windowsill. No cameras ever capture who places it there. The picture is always the same: a little boy smiling beside a window. And beneath it, written in careful handwriting, "They finally came."